Hey, also today I'm going to talk about sentiment analysis, which is a text analysis tool. I'm first going to talk about what it is and kind of explain to y'all what it does. And then I'm going to talk about the package in R that you can use to do sentiment analysis. And then I'll demonstrate in R what the steps are. So, sentiment analysis is an automated process that uses AI to identify opinions from a text, mostly positive, negative, and neutral opinions. It's widely used to get insights from things like social media comments, survey responses, and product reviews in order to make data driven decisions. It's become a key tool for making sense of qualitative data. And this is especially useful for very large data sets. And because it is an automated process, it saves a ton of time and money that would otherwise be used to pay for human labor. So there are three primary characteristics that apply to sentiment analysis. This is polarity, subject, and opinion. Polarity refers to the extent to which an expression is either positive, neutral, or negative. The subject refers to the topic of discussion, and the opinion holder refers to the individual that is expressing their thoughts. So, the automated system through which sentiment analysis operates has to first identify and therefore differentiate between subjective data, which would be considered an opinion in this case, and objective data, which are considered facts. It's then going to classify this data based on sentence structure. It uses what's called a lexicon, which is a bank of words, in order to do this. And it can operate at three different levels. The document level, which is where the entire document or paragraph can be analyzed, or in the case of survey data, the entire set of survey data. It can operate at the sentence level, so just looking at a single sentence, or the sub-sentence level, where the subcomponents of the sentence are analyzed. A primary I/O application of sentiment analysis involves the analyzation of employee feedback surveys. Specifically, some examples could include employee engagement, training evaluations, workplace culture, organizational change, performance management system surveys. Pretty much anything that you can imagine administering as a survey in I/O can be analyzed through sentiment analysis as long as it provides open-ended responses. So the key to your data is that it has to have words involved. That's, inherently what sentiment analysis is about. So it's going to allow for an organization to understand its strengths and weaknesses, as well as the polarity of employee opinion. Although it can be useful to an organization of any size, it's really more helpful for bigger organizations that are going to have a large amount of employee feedback to analyze. Understanding this feedback in the way that sentiment analysis allows for helps facilitate effective HR decision making, as well as maintaining open communication channels between employee and employer. So we talk a lot about how you need to try and facilitate that follow through whenever you collect employee survey data. Don't just collect data from employees and not do anything with it. Sentiment analysis is a really good way to start that process and understanding where your employees are coming from. So like I said, most employee opinion surveys are going to involve open-ended responses, usually like towards the end. That sentiment analysis can help automatically categorize and analyze. So in summary, it's going to allow for the understanding of not only what employees are feeling and saying, but why they are feeling and saying certain things. So to talk a little bit about the package, the Sentiment R package is a very widely used package for sentiment analysis. It's a very basic and simple application of sentiment analysis. So it becomes really helpful when analyzing text for anything that I mentioned earlier. And you can also use it in research. Some people use it in psychological, or it's very common in sociological research as well. The first big advantage of the Sentiment R package is that it's extremely simple and achievable within just a couple of lines of code, as we're going to see in a few minutes. The second advantage is that it's going to correct for inversions, meaning that while a more basic sentiment analysis would judge I am not good as being positive due to the adjective good, Sentiment R is going to recognize the inversion of good and classify the statement as negative. So all in all, Sentiment R is going to allow you to quickly do a sophisticated sentiment analysis and directly use it as an input for any further analyses that you want to do. You can use it in regression or anything like that. And it's a very simple way to do that. So now I'll go into how to do it in R. So there's a particular line of code in this analysis that takes a very long time to do. It's this one right here. It was also very difficult for me to get it to run. I don't really know why, but I kept getting like this warning message right here and then nothing would show up afterwards. And I finally got it to run. So I kept all of that stuff on my console because it takes forever for this to run and I didn't want us to just be sitting here during my video. So that's why everything's up on the console already, but I'll run through what everything is. So I have a data set here. This data contains Twitter comments, and it's just an example data set that I found online. It was extremely hard for me to find a data set that was going to work for this. I do recognize that it's not really I/O related, but I had major trouble finding access to any type of data set that would be I/O related, which makes sense since a lot of survey data obviously is confidential and whatnot. So I wasn't able to find an open access data set that was I/O relevant, but it's really going to be simple for us to pretend like it's I/O relevant because we're not going to be looking at a lot of the text in this console here. So for the purposes of this example, we're just going to pretend that the following scenario is true. The employees were given a feedback survey about a new training that they did for teamwork skills. Here we're going to perform a relatively simple form of sentiment analysis, which breaks this down by sentence and look at the sentiment that way, and then we can also look at it as a whole visually. So basically we're going to be answering the question, did employees like the new training, and were their sentiments about the new training positive or negative? So here in the data set we have this is column 5 is going to be their names, and then column 6 is going to be where the actual sentiments are. So you can imagine that these are employee feedback comments, and then to the left you would have all the rest of the quantitative data. So first we pull these libraries up. The SentimentR package is what I was talking about earlier. It's the main thing that you need to run it. ggplot2 is going to be used in order to make this histogram. And then you're just going to attach your data to the console. And then the head function is going to allow us to see the first few columns. That's here. Sorry, here. This whole thing. I'm sure y'all are familiar with that anyways. So again, we can see that the 6th column contains the sentiment text, which we're going to be plugging into the code in the next steps. So the next thing that you're going to do is run the sentiment analysis, and that is going to be this code right here. This command is going to run the analysis from a standpoint of aggregating the sentiment measures for the entire review, or you could use the sentiment command to get the sentiment per sentence. So this is the one that takes forever to run. This particular line of code that I'm running, since I had to take the other code out, this one does it by sentence. Okay, so that running this code is going to give you this output right here. This is the output that you're going to get. So the output provides the element ID, which is the identification number of the review, the word count, which is the word count number of the review, the SD or the sentence ID is the ID of the sentence within all of the sentences that we threw in, and then the sentiment this is basically like a sentiment score that tells you which direction the sentiment goes in. So for example, the first sentence is pretty negative. I mean, it's not like extremely negative, but once we have the descriptives for the entire data set, we'll be able to better easily judge where exactly these sentiments lie in comparison to others. Here we have, a relatively positive one, a neutral one. So the number of the sentiment can take positive or negative values, and it basically expresses the valence and the polarity of the sentiment. As we can see, the output does not include the full data set. We only see the first few here and the last few here. This is because this data set was extremely large. So it only shows you the first and the last bits of that. So to analyze the sentiment scores, we can use the summary function. And this is going to be a summary of the calculated sentiment scores. So if you run the summary function, you're going to get this output here. So we have the min, which is a negative 1.7, and then the mean, which is a negative 0.05, and then the max, which is a 1.68. So we have a pretty large spread. You could consider removing any outliers from this, since the min and the max are pretty far from the mean. In further analyses, you might want to remove those outliers. It's up to the researcher. So just depending on what you're doing. But again, we can see that we have a slightly negative sentiment coming from the employees. Now, the last thing that we can do here is look at a histogram. So this code here is going to give us this histogram here. And what we see is that the table information in the output, the data given to us in the output, are reflected in this histogram. So we see the mean here, and we see that we have some slightly negative sentiment here, and then we can see the spread of it. So yeah, that's a very simple sentiment analysis. You can do much more complicated ones. It depends on how many facets of emotion and affect you want to look at. But this is a really good starting point, like for someone like me or any of you guys that have never done it before. This is like a relatively simple and easy way to do a basic sentiment analysis. So yeah.